Please don't think me odd for beginning this video series on Ernst Junger's Storm of Steel, one of the great World War I novels, by treating Ernst Junger as a phenomenon instead of as a man. As a man, let it suffice to say that he was born in the late 1890s and lived to be the ripe old age of 102. His life spanned the 20th century. He fought in World War I. And Storm of Steel is the story of his participation in the war. The book begins in December 1914, after the great events that set the war in motion had passed, and after the German onslaught had been stopped in the decisive sense. The book also ends in September 1918, before the ceasefire and before the Treaty of Versailles, and all that. Certainly Junger could have discussed the outbreak of World War I and how it affected him. He could have discussed how the ceasefire affected him. He does, in the story, in a way, give us insight into why Germany waged the war and why it lost, and what those facts tell us about the modern world. I do want to give some of the backstory to the novel. But, as I say, I would like to treat Junger as a phenomenon rather than as a man, and I don't want to get into the story over much yet. Let us think of Junger by asking ourselves the obvious question of World War I. Why did World War I happen? The answers that are commonly in our history books go in two directions, and I think each direction is worthy of being included in any genuine explanation. Some historians emphasize abstract historical movements, such as nationalism and militarism and alliance systems and so on. Such things speak to the overall moral environment in which decisions that the statesmen of 1914 made, and they no doubt shaped the way they viewed the world. German militarism especially would be important in this vein because German militarism and German nationalism drove similar such things in other countries to an extent. Other historians have done a wonderful job doing archival work and shown, beyond much by way of doubt in my judgment, that Germany brought the war on, that Germany wanted the war. Germany manipulated the events after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand so that a larger war would be brought about before it was too late for Germany. Now, as I say, each of these is true. But we need to think about why Germany was the way it was. There is nothing in the German blood, I would suggest, nor is something in German culture intrinsically warlike, nor is the fact that Germany was relatively young the most decisive thing. Why was Germany more militaristic, and thus more inclined to start such a war? Let me offer a rather theoretical answer to this question, one that might shed some light on Ernst Junger, and, as I say more speculatively, his generation broadly understood. Germany became one officially only during the 1860s and 1870s under the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Nevertheless, Germany became much more united in manners and mores before it was one politically. And this makes all the difference. The timing goes like this. German civilization, the apex of its art, novels, and philosophy, came in the years 1770 through 1820 or so. I am thinking specifically of thinkers like Kant and Herder and Hegel. I am thinking of German novelists like Goethe and Schiller. And I am thinking of Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, whose works took place mostly in these years. Now, this stream of thought and culture shaping art is part of a reaction to the first, and I am tempted to say the most responsible wave of modern thought that established the modern world, the thought of France and England. As America was realizing the Enlightenment in 1776, German civilization was founded in large part against those Enlightenment ideas. Here is what I am thinking. France and England established the thought and culture that gave us free societies. But those societies came at a cost. Modern free society was achieved by lowering the goals of political and social life and by redefining morality as something consistent with individual self interest. Honesty is the best policy. Private vices make for public virtues. I have these ideas in mind, and I am simplifying for the sake of clarity. Those ideas represent the French and French and British approach. German thinkers and artists and novelists objected to this reduction of morality to self interest, just as it was establishing modern society. This German refusal to identify morality and self interest came about just as modern morality was established in Germany. Kant's philosophy of the categorical imperative illuminates this position more radically than anything else. Kant insisted on duty for duty's sake. Actions were to be done not because they were useful or brought happiness or conducive to public peace or because our passions pointed in that direction. Actions were to be done because of duty, even to the point of self-sacrifice. So Germans were interested in self-sacrifice and duty. Germans expressed their morality in the opposition between nobility on the one hand and utility on the other, between what is noble and what is useful. Justice and moderation and other virtues are both noble and useful. But the utility of courage or martial valor is dubious. Other virtues are both noble and useful, while courage is noble, and its utility to the individual, where courage can lead to death on the battlefield, is more difficult to account for. German thinkers as diverse as Hegel and Fichte, and certainly Nietzsche, were thus always tempted to overemphasize the martial virtues, or war for its own sake. This made militarism a permanent temptation for Germans themselves. Helmut von Moltke, the Elder, the legendary chief of staff in the Prussian-German General Staff, during its wars of the 1860s and 1870s, put this thought best. This is what von Moltke said, quote, "Eternal peace is a dream, and not even a beautiful one." End quote. It is certainly true that eternal peace on earth is a dream, but it is much more dubious that eternal proof is not a beautiful idea. Wouldn't eternal peace be nice? Moltke said, no. Eternal peace would slacken the strings of human action, in essence. And this means that he thought war was a human good, or at least that he was tempted to think that war was a human good. One can find that thought in Hegel and Nietzsche, I think. Think of it like this. German thinkers were critical of modern ideas of equality and rationalism, and those ideas came from the English. They reacted to that rejection of the English Enlightenment with an embrace of self-sacrifice, as opposed to self-interest, and particularity and romantic sense of belonging instead of universal reason. This meant that Germans would love martial virtues, both in themselves and as instruments of state, much more than other European countries would. The best and the brightest would become military men in Germany, not shopkeepers. This affected German culture and politics, as the German army was given freer rein than it was in any other country. German militarism comes from German civilization, and German civilization was a latish, modern critique of enlightenment. It was a critique of the low but solid grounds of modern society. The point I want to emphasize is that the German critique of modernity culminated in an embrace of what our historians, without much knowing why, call militarism. It would be better to call that German civilization one dedicated to the fighting spirit. Junger was from this tradition. He was a civilized German. He accepted the critique of humdrum bourgeois life and thought that heroism and service and sacrifice were higher goods than could be experienced elsewhere. While not a militarist, he immediately saw the goods associated with the fighting way of life, and he entered into it with gusto. One of the great questions that Storm of Steel deals with is whether the fighting spirit survives the advent of modern weapons. For so many thinkers, World War I meant the death of heroism. Junger, in contrast, realizes that that would mean the end of Germany as he knows it. And he shows how heroism survives and is perhaps even heightened by the presence of these awful weapons. One can really only understand Junger, and hence one can only really understand Germany, if one understands why Germany embraced this fighting spirit.